I'd like to pick up where Senator Cardin was leaving off there in terms of China. And Mr. Kim, you said that, okay, they don't want to use North Korea as, or it's a, old thinking that they'd be using that as a useful buffer. But then you said they're concerned about instability along their border. I mean, is it your view, is it the administration's view that if they pressed North Korea to denuclearize, to open up their society, that would create, what, a refugee flow out of North Korea into China?
No, so I don't necessarily agree with that perspective. I was just relaying what I understood to be China's concerns.
Okay, so again, I want to, because I don't understand it. Why does China continue to support this regime? What's in it for China? I mean, if it's not that buffer against the West, why would they continue to do this? It doesn't seem like it's particularly stable to me.
No.
A nuclearized North Korea with ballistic missile technology firing these things over their neighbors' heads seems pretty unstable. So what's in it for China? I'm really trying to understand that.
Well, China has a long-standing special relationship with North Korea, and our sense is that Beijing is simply not ready to give up on or abandon that relationship. But I agree completely with you that the actions that the North Koreans are taking are destabilizing for China's own interest. And if China really strives to be a leading nation in the international community, I think they would want a neighborhood that's stable and peaceful.
But I'm looking for a rational explanation of why China would continue to support North Korea when every action I'd look at North Korea just destabilizes the region. Mr. King, maybe you can answer that for me. I mean, some measure of rationale for this.
I don't have any insights. It's very clear that the Chinese have been pushing the North Koreans in a more positive direction. But I think North Korea is not an easy ally to deal with. And my guess is North Koreans are not being terribly cooperative.
Does China fear North Korea because they have nuclear weapons by any chance? Mr. Kim?
I'm obviously not speaking on behalf of the Chinese government, but my sense is that they've reached the conclusion that in order to make some positive changes in North Korea will require enormous pressure. And I think their concern is that enormous pressure on Pyongyang, on the regime, will lead to instability. And I believe that's what...
So define instability. I understand the word, but define it. What would become less stable than it currently is? I mean, in other words, are they willing to basically put up with North Korea because they so repress their population is going to stay in North Korea and they don't have to worry about a refugee flow into China?
I'm sorry, I mean, again, I don't want to be a spokesperson for the Chinese government.
I understand. I'm just asking for your theory of the case.
Yeah, my understanding is that the Chinese are worried that if there's too much pressure too fast on the regime in Pyongyang, that it would lead to instability in Pyongyang that spreads over throughout the country, and that there will, in fact, be refugee flows into China. I believe that that is one of their concerns.
Let's talk about sanctions. Mr. King said that information is key, and I agree with him. Earlier, when you were answering a question from our chairman, you said that you cannot describe some of these sanctions in this setting. I just want to ask, first of all, why? First, let me ask about the history of sanctions. Again, just this news reports back in the Bush administration where we were sanctioning individuals, reports, analysis of those sanctions seemed that they were working pretty well. And then those were relaxed and obviously it didn't really affect North Korea's behavior past that point. Can you just give me a little bit of sense of what sanctions have worked, what has the history been, where are we now versus where we were during the Bush administration? And then the final question is, what's classified about that? What's censored about that? If we want to get information out there, I would think an overt policy, an overt strategy of sanctioning North Korea would be something we want to publicize.
Senator, maybe I wasn't clear enough earlier. I wasn't suggesting that I couldn't talk about sanctions in general. I was suggesting that some of the specific effects we've had with certain sanctions involves classified information, and therefore I could not get into those.
Okay. Well, again, so give me the history of sanctions. I mean, what have we found that has worked? Again, analysis I've read just in open source news is that when we were sanctioning individual North Korean leaders, that was effective. and then we relax those sanctions. If we put those back in place, is there a reluctance to put those back in place? What's happening?
Well, first of all, North Korea remains one of the most heavily sanctioned countries anywhere. We have North Korea-specific executive orders that give us a lot of authority to designate North Korean entities, personnel, officials, and entities that support the regime. We also have general executive orders, topic-based, non-prohibition, WMD-related executive orders that we can apply to the North Korea context. Obviously, export controls is another way that we control, try to sanction North Korea. I believe, Senator, you're referring to the Banco Delta Asia financial sanctions that were in place during the Bush administration. I agree with you that had a very effective role, that played an effective role. But again, I mean, I should probably defer to my colleagues in the Treasury Department, but the difficulty of replicating financial sanctions like that is that because we were so successful, the North Koreans are basically operating outside of the international financial system. Therefore, it's very difficult to come up with similar sanctions targeting banks that have dealings with North Korea because North Koreans are basically operating outside of the international banking system. But I agree with you. I think we need to continue to explore all possible opportunities to strengthen our sanctions regime against North Korea, both in terms of coming up with new unilateral sanctions, but also making sure that our partners in the international community are cooperating better in enforcing Security Council resolution sanctions.
So bottom line, they learned from those and they've circumvented those types of sanctions, so they're not as effective anymore. In your testimony, you said that North Korea continues to violate its commitments and international obligations. With the few seconds we have remaining, can you just, from a priority standpoint, specifically tell us what are those commitments and international obligations that they're violating?
Well, sir, I mean, multiple Security Council resolutions call for North Korea to abandon its nuclear ambitions, programs. Also calls on North Korea to stop using ballistic missile technology. So every time North Koreans take an action, whether it's a nuclear test or, frankly, even continued pursuit of their nuclear ambitions, is a violation of Security Council resolutions. In their own commitment to the six-party process, in the joint statement of 2005, they agreed to abandon their existing nuclear programs and nuclear weapons programs. So clearly, they're not living up to their obligations and commitments.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted that on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.